if the consumer side is totally unrelated, which is that sort of urban legend that really got me jazzed up for this call is the whole ancestry thing or the 23andMe. And to be clear, that's not a tool for law enforcement.
No, we have no access to any of that information lawfully, and it explicitly violates those companies' terms of use.
All right, cool. Now, this will be chat number 2 with Chris Lyons of the Florida Investigators Network, FININC.org for the uninitiated. And last time we were chatting, we just briefly talked about genetic genealogy and how it applies to investigations, how it applies to cold cases, how it applies to crime in general. We only touched on a little bit, but I'd like to give you the floor and really dig into that a little bit. Where would you start?
So traditionally, I think genetic genealogy is thought of as being only a cold case investigative tool. And then when they had the murders in Idaho with the professor that had killed a few students, they used genetic genealogy in a new case, which I thought was really interesting. Because, I mean, there's no reason it couldn't be done. But most of the time when I think of it being used, it's used in cold, unresolved cases, not fresh cases, but there's no reason that it couldn't be. But that was I'm sure it's been done, but that was, I think, the first time on a large scale, on a large case, nationally in the US, that it had been utilized, at least highly publicized.
Now, why wouldn't it be used on every single new case? And why would your experience be mostly that it's used with cold cases?
Because it is expensive and time consuming, and a lot of people don't really know how to properly do it. And everything else in that cold case, whatever the case is, has already been utilized, and there's no more options. So they say, well, there's this new option. Let's try this and see if we get some resolution to it. We spoke about it a little bit last time. The mainstream media, when they write about cold cases, it absolutely drives me bonkers because they're trying to cover the story and give the public an insight about the case and explain how it was resolved, but they just use terms incorrectly and interchangeably, and it just, as someone who uses it to read it, it just drives me insane. They're just trying to tell the story, but there's certain terms that aren't interchangeable, and they use them interchangeably.
Interesting.
So,
elaborate if you would.
So, are you familiar with the term CODIS?
Yeah, it's a database, right?
It is. It's CODIS. It's the database for convicted offenders. Each state has one. They maintain it at the state level, and then they upload that data to the national level, and it has to be a certain quality sample to have enough genetic information to be eligible to be entered into that database. But you can do a thing in CODIS called a familial search. So say I had committed some awful crime and I was not a convicted offender, so my DNA is at a scene, but my brother had served time in prison in Florida, where I live, and say the case occurred in Florida. So Florida is one of, I think, 13 states that allows familial searching in CODIS. So you have to get special permission from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and your prosecutor's office. And you say, we've exhausted all our leads. We don't have anywhere else to go. We have this good sample, but we've uploaded it into CODIS and there have been no hits. We would like to do familial searching in CODIS to see if the offender has a relative that matches to give us, or not matches, but a relative that is somehow genetically related to the offender that could give us a lead about where to go. That is a true familial search by the statutory definition and the technological definition of what the technology can do. And I see in genetic genealogy news stories, they use the term familial search, referring to IgG cases, which is incorrect. And it's just because they're not trying to mislead people. They just don't know any better. It's just new technology. But as someone who's an end user, who there's distinct difference when I read it, it just drives me crazy.
Oh, I know where you're coming from. I've watched the news before.
So that's a good example. I also see a lot where they refer to a case that was solved by, say, one of the really large DNA companies like Ancestry or 23andMe. They'll say because the offender's cousin took a 23andMe test, the police were able to close an unsolved violent crime, and that is absolutely incorrect. So the police do not have any special access to any of those companies. Those are private companies. They maintain those databases. They are very, very protective of that information and their consumers' information and rights and privacy. We cannot, as law enforcement, we cannot search, nor do we have any access to any of that data. And the way the newspaper, or the media makes it look is that if you've taken a 23andMe test or something, that means, you're in the matrix, and we can, see every cousin that you have in your family tree, which would be incredible, but it's just not so. It does not work that way. We are not allowed to do that.
Okay, so state and local law enforcement definitely doesn't have unfettered access to those databases. I'll go as far as understanding that. If you tell me federal doesn't have unfettered access to those databases, I'll eat my shoe. I mean illegal access.
Yeah, no, they do not have access to any of that information. It's held.
You're telling me the NSA doesn't have a chart on the wall of me and my cousins? I would be sure. I'm always talking shit on Rumsfeld just for fun in my emails.
Yeah. If they did, those companies would, I think, lose a lot of their customers, because when you go through, like I have my DNA in Ancestry, I have my whole family tree built out. When I did that, you have to sign pages and pages of permissions that, that you're knowingly becoming involved in this program, and that you're uploading this data. But most of it is them explaining to you what they will not do with your data, which is like sell it to Pfizer or sell your genetic information to a company, any other company, or a doctor, anything like that, for purposes of research. That law enforcement does not have access to it. If we did, that would make life a lot easier, because they estimate, I think there's like upwards of 30 million profiles in Ancestry. So if they want to push the magic go button and make that happen, that would be great. But I don't think that's going to happen.
How do those databases compare to the databases in the 13 states you mentioned? In terms of proportion, that's a huge number you just mentioned in Ancestry. So do these private companies completely dwarf the system that's in place in terms of CODIS across the states that use it?
I don't have exact
Oh,
numbers.
fair. Yeah, they probably don't publish that kind of stuff
No,
either.
they don't. And but it's been estimated. One article that I read that Ancestry had upwards of like 25 million DNA profiles nationally. But those are people who are paying for that service. They are voluntarily submitting their DNA to a private company for their own, for lack of a better word, entertainment purposes, to build out their family tree and, you know, look for their long lost brother or whatever. Some people do like a family project. They'll buy DNA kits for everybody for Christmas and mail them to, you know, their family members and stuff, and do that. I've seen that before.
That's pretty fun. I'm not gonna lie. And it's a little warmer and fuzzier sounding to have you go into the fact that, and it makes sense. I mean, these organizations aren't trying to get sued, and they're certainly working in a potentially delicate area in terms of PIP information or yeah, just sensitive stuff. You know, it's so that's that's encouraging. And clearly I'm coming at it from the side of all I've ever been exposed to other than our brief exchanges is the cuckoo stuff from the news. So I'm a perfect sounding board for you to um expose the gibberish because I'm sure I'm pretty much I've only been exposed to gibberish and I'm more than happy to reflect that back to you so you can see how bad it is. But um yeah, that is different than I thought. And my understanding was that was the Matrix understanding was, oh my gosh, my cousins are in these, or I've got an aunt who did it or whatever. That exposes me. Like, you know, I'm thinking now, watch too many movies. But if you're the subject of a nefarious investigator, you were the subject of a bad intentioned actor who's within this system, then I got concerned because I was like, well, they already have the evidence now. All they'd have to do is, I mean, and it's not like I've been running around picking up every hair I've shed in the, you know, heck, the Airbnb I'm in, you know, you could run a business as an Airbnb person just collecting DNA from everybody who stayed in your place for the next 20 years. And you
So
run a freaking blackmail scam.
So when we have done, I did one case where we collected what's called discarded DNA from an offender, and you have to be very careful that you are in fact collecting a DNA sample from that person. If you have a guy who's standing out in front of a business and he's having a cigarette, and then he goes inside and tosses his cigarette in the bin, and there's 50 cigarettes in there, you know, do you want to bet that person's freedom on a 1 out of 50 that you're grabbing the right one? Is it the one that, you'd think there's a few ways to look at it. It's probably still hot. It might still be burning, but what if a guy had just walked in there 60 seconds before him and did the same thing? So I wouldn't say that you would be more likely to include and accidentally convict an innocent person as you would actually be more likely to exonerate a guilty person. That you would, if you grab the wrong cigarette and you say that's not, you test it and you say, oh, he's not the guy, but he's not the guy because you don't have the right cigarette. You grabbed the guy that was in there for a few minutes before. So on the case that we had, the guy was in a parking lot alone. We had, checked the area, and he had one cigarette in his hand, in his mouth, and we had an undercover detective who observed him flick that cigarette. He drove away, and then we sat there and watched it and immediately collected it. So it went from his hand and mouth to the ground, and we saw it happen and maintained custody of it and took it as evidence. That's the only responsible way to do it, because you have to testify that piece of evidence was directly in your suspect's possession.
That's right out of a TV show.
Hmm.
Man, you have kind of a cool job some days. I got to tell you, I want to do a ride along.
But that when it got to that point, we had other factors that indicated that was the person. But that is going to be your final confirmation, and then, or I should say, your second to final, because for our DNA lab won't do, that's called like a secondary standard. So we have to do a 1-to-1 standard, which is somebody, a detective, taking a DNA buccal swab directly from their mouth and then entering it into evidence. And then that is what is used as the comparison in the DNA side, in the DNA lab, to make sure 100% that you have the correct person, that the samples weren't mixed up, that they weren't contaminated, that the cigarette wasn't the right cigarette, that, and that, I think, is the only responsible way to do it, to 100% make sure that you have the correct person.
And that won't then bring in the incorrect parties. So in the example you used a moment ago, the wrong cigarette isn't going to convict the wrong guy because you don't have him in the mix to compare to begin with. So the process will be a process of eliminating by comparison, not including by comparison, if I'm understanding correct. Okay.
Right. Because say if you had like a sexual battery, a rape case, and the detective accidentally retrieves the wrong cigarette, that cigarette, because it's just some random person, is not going to match the DNA from the scene of the offender. So that now is not going to make the innocent person the suspect.
Gotcha. Which is a very obvious component as long as you take a moment to stop and think about it, which is probably what doesn't happen on this subject like many others, which is why there's so much confusion. But some of this is pretty elementary when you lay it out. It's like, well, 1 + 1 = 2, but in that particular scenario, it's a 0 + 1 equation. Like you don't have the other element in terms of matching up or comparison. So that makes sense. It's not like you can net somebody into the matrix and all of a sudden they're guilty because you guys grabbed the wrong cigarette, which is a good checkbox. Okay, I'm becoming more and more comfortable with this as we go. Okay, what follows next, and because this so far is pretty good, I gotta say. I'm not horrified by any of this, and you told me I wouldn't be.
So when you take that direct swab directly from the suspect, that is then entered directly into evidence and then taken to the DNA lab. We're lucky where I live and work. We have our own lab. There's also a state lab that's nearby, but not every agency is that fortunate. But we're very lucky where I am.
That's Pinellas County?
Pinellas, yes.
Shout out Pinellas County DNA posse.
And we have that ability where they can do that comparison directly for us. So when you hear in terms of genetic genealogy, it's a different file type. So genetic genealogy uses a profile called a SNP, which is a SNP, which is more of a built out like human genome, thousands and thousands of characteristics. For criminal cases, we use a system that's called STR, Standard Tandem Repeats, which is certain genetic markers that are used in the CODIS system that they can compare and then determine if the contributor of that sample is in fact the person from that crime scene. And after that's done, they can give you a statistical analysis of, and they break it down they don't come out and just say yes or no. They give you like a mathematical formula of, unlike it's very confusing to read. They say something like the chances of selecting an unrelated individual that would be this person is, I had one that was 16 quadrillion. So, I don't know how many a quadrillion is. I know it's more than the number of people on Earth, because there's about 7 billion with a B people on Earth, and this was quadrillion.
I'm not sure I'm even familiar with the terminology. That's how big it is.
No, I'm not.
Jeez.
When I spoke with the analyst on that case, I said, that sounds good. What does it actually mean? And she explained that it was X amount of number of people on Earth, that essentially that is the only person on Earth who matches that profile, that the DNA information and the profile was at a very high rate. So they were able to mathematically chart it out very far, which is good in court. Because if you had a weak sample and you said, well, it's a 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000. Well, my county has about 1 million people in it. So 1 in 100,000 sounds good, but then really what you're saying is in a population of 1 million people, that there's 10 people that could possibly be a contributor to that profile. So when you lay it out that way, it's not as sure of a thing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when you said quadrillion, or I was like, that's just a silver platter for the courtroom is what that is. That's like, I mean, it doesn't really get any better than that in terms of eliminating doubt.
Right.
But that's real math, and 10 people locally is something you need to take seriously if you're sitting in your chair. You can't say, oh, well, 10 in 1,000,000, that's not bad. We probably have the right guy. So I can see where that doesn't really accomplish much. Like in that, to a lot of people in their everyday math, that would sound like, oh, that's significant. But really it's, well, that's very, very, loose. Like that's not a stringent, filter at that point, even with, 1 in 100,000, like you say.
And then, you would build that, and sometimes that's as good as it gets. The sample is what the sample is. It's degraded. It rained that day. It was outside in the heat and the weather, and the sample was just degraded. The DNA lab has done their best, and that is as good as it's going to get. So then, you have to start to look at other corroborative evidence, maybe a cell phone triangulation. Where was that person that day? Do they have a job? Do they live locally? Do they know the victim? There's different things like that where, if you can show that person was in Baltimore that day, at a Ravens game, he's probably not your guy, so there's other things. It's just not, well, the DNA matches and says it's him. I think the public has a misconception that we just feed this information into a computer, and then the computer gives us a little green check mark, and we go out and blindly arrest the person because the computer says that it's him or it's her, and there's no other investigation. It says, oh, well, it's the DNA, and that's it. They're going to jail. You have to look at all the circumstances in the case to see, is this your person, and if so, why? Other than just the DNA.
Like more of a mosaic where everything has a certain weight, and you have to make sense of the whole picture.
Yes. DNA evidence is fantastic evidence, but it has to fit everything else, and it has to fit the whole story. It's just not, well, the DNA matches, so that's him.
Case closed on TV. As soon as DNA comes up on TV, someone's either fully exonerated or fully guilty. It's, I haven't seen them really struggle with this percentage conversation on, any of the legal TV shows. They're not like, well, let's really thoughtfully consider this. It's we got him, or, oh my gosh, he didn't do it. It's that cut and dry, which is why we need to have this conversation.
And also, not that lack of evidence is evidence, but if you have, say, a murder inside a house where there are two defendants and one does the murder and one is a lookout or is present, if the person who, say it's a shooting, say the person who is the second guy doesn't touch or manipulate anything, he may not have left fingerprints or DNA, but he could have information about that crime. So just because you say, oh, well, his DNA doesn't match anything, he wasn't there, it's not always necessarily so either.
Would it be fair to say that it's maybe the opposite of what the layman's first impression is? Like, as you become qualified, as you become the person who's able to handle these things on the law enforcement side, it seems to me that a significant part of your training is to not be swayed by the DNA, because it could be the thing that screws up your investigation if you don't put it in the framing that you're describing. If you've had any sort of pollution from the TV version of DNA investigation, to your point, the first thing it would make an investigator do is close off avenues that they should be thinking about. So I understand why why you've got it framed totally different than I do in my head as a layman, is that as this DNA hits you, you've got to be like, okay, well, what is this going to make me think that could be contrary to the most effective way to investigate the case? Per your point, if a person is in the conversation of the case and there's no DNA for him, it might be real easy to put them on a don't bother with list because you've got this exciting other stuff to chase. So to your, that makes a lot of sense and is slightly counterintuitive in its sort of vibe to how you think you would receive it as a person who doesn't know anything about it. You think you'd see the DNA and that directs you, but that would be a negative thing. There's so much more in the universe of any given case. It's funny. It's like how I thought it was like a way to include people into an investigation, but it's really a way to exclude people, and eliminate them. And then sort of from your side, I would have originally thought it's the thing that you immediately want to shine a light on if there's a glimmer of DNA in the case. But the shiny thing in the room is always the thing that distracts you from what you might be looking for as well. And that is what it could become in a case to the uneducated, uninitiated kind of thing. Very interesting, because both of those facets are sort of the opposite of what I had at first blush in terms of an impression.
In the case that we spoke about last time with Tom Sawyer and Janet Stashak, if you have a lady who is the victim of a homicide, say she's walking down the street, she is attacked, a guy robs her, steals her purse, and in the process of the robbery, she's killed. She's fully dressed. There's no indication that she was, any disrobed or any of her clothing was removed. Now, because it's a homicide and because it's a female, you're probably going to do a sexual assault kit, because you never get a chance to do it again. So you have to collect everything and have everything saved and preserved, because you only get one chance to do it right. But if you have this lady who's only missing her purse, who's completely dressed, who has no signs of sexual assault, and then has male DNA in her vagina, that could be from a consensual encounter that occurred. I think now the science says that a DNA sample can survive up to 120 hours, where we can get results from it inside of a female victim. So it's
almost a week.
Yeah. So if she had consensual sex with somebody within that time, and then was the unfortunate victim of a robbery where she was murdered, does that DNA inside her make that contributor automatically your murderer? No, of course not. So you want to try to identify that person to see what his relationship was with her, and things like that. But it's, I think, like you had said earlier, that DNA is the magic bullet. And if there's DNA in a case, but in that case, in that example, there's no indication that she was the victim of a sexual assault during that robbery. So that DNA probably means nothing. From, a sexual encounter that she had prior to her death that is in no way related to that robbery.
And you probably, I guess once you've worked a few cases, you probably learn this real quick. Like, you probably don't get all excited over DNA once you've been down the path once or twice, because it's very much not the magic qualifying or disqualifying bullet that it's portrayed as on TV. So you guys probably lose that type of unwarranted excitement level real quick, actually, because it doesn't serve you and you don't get rewarded for it.
Where it is beneficial in an attack like I described with the female getting robbed is most women usually leave their fingernails a little longer than most men do. And if it was a particularly violent attack, what we call clippings and scrapings, they would do swabbings and then clip her fingernails and then scrape the contents beneath her fingernails for DNA processing. I would be much more interested to know a contributor of DNA under her fingernails in that type of attack than of a sexual assault kit, because she fought with that guy. She didn't just stand there and let herself get murdered. She probably put up some kind of resistance, had some kind of physical contact with that person, maybe scratched him, maybe drew blood, maybe physically struggled with him. So those types of swabs in that type of case are really, really probative. Again, not the magic bullet, and you have to weigh it, because that DNA might not be from that offender at all, but you have to try to determine if there is foreign DNA that's foreign to her, who that person is and how it got there.
This is so much clearer to me now. And my only concern now is that I walked into this call so ignorant that I'm guessing none of my questions are all that poignant, because now I already understand it in 20 minutes very differently than I did when we got on the call, which shows you how little time and effort I put into trying to understand it to begin with. So it should give you pause, considering I'm the guy sitting in front of a mic with a legal podcast wanting to talk about it. But I like asking questions from a place of complete ignorance, because I do think, and that's why as a non-lawyer I'm even involved in this project, because we know some of our audiences doesn't have a JD, while a bunch of our audience does have a JD. That's a Juris Doctorate for the people who don't have one, by the way. That's a law degree. Fascinating. So how much, it seems actually less complicated now. How much, now I feel like there's less sort of secrets and layers to the onion than there were when we got on the call, because this seems relatively cut and dry in terms of how you use the tool. Are there any instances that can really throw you? Or is there anything you have to be on the lookout for that can really get you? Because to me, this seems, again, it seems actually, safer is the word I should be using, but safer is the word I'm going to use. Like, I feel safer about this whole conversation. and the genetic genealogy process. And certainly the fact that if the consumer side is totally unrelated, which is that sort of urban legend that really got me jazzed up for this call, is the whole ancestry thing, or the 23andMe. And to be clear, that's not a tool for law enforcement.
No, we have no access to any of that information lawfully, and it explicitly violates those companies' terms of use. We can't, even if, say, law enforcement utilized one of those databases and got information in violation of those terms of use in a way that you were not supposed to.
You just planted a poison tree, right?
That's exactly correct. So then later, when you have to explain to a judge why you want a search warrant for Mr. Smith's DNA, or you want to issue an arrest warrant for Mr. Smith, well, how did you get to that point? Because a search warrant, you give information about yourself. I'm Detective Smith. This is who I am. This is where I work. This is what I want, and this is why. And then you have to write out a detailed, what's called an affidavit, which is that you're swearing to the facts of that investigation. So step one is I created a fake account and uploaded DNA to a public or a private company and uploaded genetic information directly in violation of their terms of use. And then I found out XYZ. None of that information can be used in court. And if you can't use that information in court, it doesn't matter. If you have a confession from a suspect and, you tie him to a tree and beat him with a rod, and he says, yeah, I killed the person, that confession, you violated his rights. That confession is not admissible in court. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter what he tells you, and any information that you gained from that confession, anything that you gained from that improper upload of that genetic information, you wouldn't be able to use it in any court. It would be worthless.
It's like a pee in the mattress when you do that. You can't, the judge is going to, or even a prosecutor for a warrant or something like that down the road, they're going to make you step back through that process you just described.
And you have to go.
Yeah, it's going to be uncovered. Like,
you have to go through every step of that investigation of what the crime was, what information you had, what you started with, and then what you did to discover to get to that next level. It's not going to be of any benefit to you because you can't use it. It wasn't obtained illegally in the sense of like that you broke a law or violated somebody's rights, but those databases are private and they explicitly have terms of use that you will not do that. Well, and that's their information, and they're allowed to say who has access to it. So if you access it under false pretenses, just saying that you're doing your family DNA project and you're actually the police, and then you use that information in a criminal investigation, none of it is going to be admissible, and you're going to greatly damage that case is destroyed, and then any other cases, you're going to damage the procedure and the use and the technology for every other detective out there, because that story is going to be portrayed in the media, and you're going to damage this very valuable technique for any other investigator out there.
On anything that would carry the magnitude of DNA testing, there's an appeal process if there was a conviction. So, yeah, you're really exposing yourself as law enforcement, really exposing yourself to issues as law enforcement. So that's worth taking note. That doesn't seem like the kind of thing that will be abused under those circumstances.
No, no. Like I said, it would be one, you'd be personally responsible, ethically, personally. You're going to be heavily sanctioned by your agency, if not terminated. And then any information that you did learn that was beneficial wouldn't be admissible in any court anyway. So you wouldn't achieve anything, even if you were able to somehow push it through and arrest the person or obtain a warrant for their arrest. Eventually, that is going to be uncovered, and it's all going to be for nothing.
I mean, at that rate, you're talking about a civil suit to ice the cake down the road too.
I'm sure that would happen.
Yeah. No, that's a shit pie. You're right. There's no reason for a law enforcement person to want to take that path unless they're trying to burn themselves at that point. Okay, well, I'm comfortable with that. I think abuses should burn you. So you've relaxed me somewhat on this conversation. What have we left off the table? Because this does seem you've created a much more simpler view of this process. And I was totally polluted with the consumer products being mixed in and these databases all being available. And that's that's a terrifying proposition to me still, because I don't know if I trust the mix of public and private as much as I trust, public servants. And I trust a business to do their thing. It's when they're mixing together doing weird shit that I get concerned. So I like that law enforcement has their databases, and I like that there's all sorts of disclaiming and so forth. So, and I can see, some sort of marriage in the future. Obviously, that seems like a possibility, unless that's the type of possibility that's going to put 23andMe or Ancestry out of business when people hear that. So maybe that's the protection, is Ancestry. For me as a consumer, they have no interest in opening that door, because that'll be very dissuasive to people who might be future Ancestry customers, and that the other databases will grow.
So the patch for that is a product that was developed by a guy actually who lived in Florida, of a company called GEDmatch. And what he designed was, if say you and I were related, but we didn't know it. So I'm looking for my brother, you're looking for your brother, maybe we're step children, maybe we are half brothers. I mean, maybe we were adopted, a million different scenarios. So I test in 23andMe, I send my thing up, and I get no matches, no relatives. I can't find anybody in my family. You do yours in Ancestry, you complete the kit and send it up, and you can't find anything. There is a private program called GEDmatch, which is GED match, that allows you to download, as a private citizen, to download your own genetic information and then upload it into a searchable database that allows you to compare your information to other people who have used different private companies than you have. So it allows the 23andMe users to compare genetic information against the Ancestry users. However, it is entirely on that. It's a detailed process. You have to create an account. You have to obtain the information. When I've done it with 23andMe, I did it with my own information. There's a few safeguards to make sure that they tell you that you're downloading your genetic information, that it's private, that it's sensitive. And then when you create the GEDmatch account, it's the same process where it's saying, if you do this, it's going to be in this database, it's going to be viewable by other people. Are you sure that you want to do this? And then on top of that, since genetic genealogy has become so prevalent, there is a separate explicit disclaimer, which means you can opt out for law enforcement sharing. So I can still search for my brother if I want to, but that information is not accessible or searchable by law enforcement. So those specific permissions are built in there, so the private consumer can still try to do their family research, but that doesn't instantly mean you're handing over your profile to the police.
Gotcha.
So so anybody who does that process, and there's a when you click on it, it's like a little blue policeman's hat, and it is a check mark, and it says opt in for law enforcement sharing, and then there's a little 2 or 3 sentences beneath that explain exactly what that means, and then it's a yes or a no. So it's very, very explicitly stated if people want to participate in that. Now, if they opt in for that sharing, we can see that information through GEDmatch, but that is only because they have given their explicit permission that law enforcement can use that information.
That's a cool product, actually. That's an interesting application. And I'm not surprised somebody probably thought of it right away, too. They were like, well, here's the problem. And cool solution.
So it was designed by a guy who lived in somewhere on the east coast of Florida, down like southeast Florida. And he was just kind of a hobbyist, and but very, very bright. And he was able to design this program that did that. When genetic genealogy started to kind of blow up, there was some controversies around it, and he's an older guy, and he just said, I'm done with this. He was tired of, I think he was on 60 Minutes. He was on a few different programs, and he sold the program to a company in California named Verigen, which is a private company that they make forensic supplies, and they machinery, instruments for law enforcement, and private labs and stuff all over the world. I think they're based out of Germany. They make scientific instruments, but he sold the information to that company.
Yeah, interesting. He wasn't looking for a hassle. I could see that. He was like, oh, I was, if he was just sort of casually dabbling, and the next thing you know, he's got to defend his software solutions on 16 Minutes. I'd be like, who wants to buy this? I'm not looking for this crap.
He's probably like 75 years old. And, what he did, which was a brilliant idea, how he did it, but I'm sure that he did not intend on it for being used the way that it ultimately was used. So it was like an unforeseen consequence. And then when it started becoming a really hot button issue in the public's eye, I think he just really wanted nothing to do with it. I think he was just a man who found genealogy and that type of research interesting, and was trying to help people discover their background and their family, and he had no intention of this happening. And then when it did, he just said, I'm too old for this, and was done with it.
Cool. I mean, I don't blame him. I mean, it sounds like a fun ride while it lasted, but why stick around if you're not having fun anymore? Get out, and he exited with a sale. Good for him. Yeah, I can root for people from the wrong side of Florida. It's all right. It's okay. I won't hold to the East Coast against him. Seems like a bright guy. This was enlightening to me. Anybody who sat through the last hour, I think, has and who started as clueless as I did, has gained something. Anybody who jumped on the call and knew this soup to nuts, is probably a detective. So I think this is good info to share. I know Meg and some of the other lawyers I'm working with will probably enjoy this. I don't know how much exposure they've gotten to it personally, although I'm sure some of them have. They're, former prosecutors / criminal defense now. But yeah, kind of neat, nuanced, but also it's a more clear less nebulous matrix-like proposition than I thought it was going to be. It's not nearly as scary when you get a little bit of an elevator pitch on how it works and what the intended safeguards are. How do you feel about that? Did we cover most of this?
I feel good about it, and I mentioned at one point too, we're trying to establish like best practices, kind of a guidebook for law enforcement and prosecutors, so that the technology is used properly and responsibly, and then that process can also be replicated, where I would be able to show somebody the steps that we took and say, we started with this sample, then we went to third cousin Ed, then we went here, then we went there, and then ultimately to be able to replicate the process and show the steps that we took to ultimately arrive at that suspect, and then doing the standard police lab STR DNA confirmation. I think that if it's explained that way, and the more that it's utilized, and just the clearer that we are about it, from some of the TV shows I watched, there's always these high level government conspiracies, and technology and shadow this. I wish we were even a tenth as sophisticated on those shows. Most of the time, if you put 4 detectives in a room, they wouldn't be able to agree where to go to lunch. Forget about some high level, conspiracy about anything. So I think the longer that it's in the public eye, that we're transparent about the way that it's done, the way that the process is, and that it's transparent and easily explainable to somebody who isn't familiar with it, that the public will have a strong confidence in it, and that'll be a good investigative tool to solve violent crime.
So that'd be a good little media project for the Florida Investigators Network, to have sort of a comprehensive breakdown. Or is that the venue you would explain this to people in?
That could be one of them. For every one step forward, there's always 2 steps back. So there was, with the Idaho murders, there was, I watched a story about some young lady, I think she lives in Texas, and she just came out and was online with these crazy conspiracy theories about other people that were involved in the crime. It had nothing to do with genetic genealogy, but she was just absolutely insistent that a different faculty member was involved in the murder.
I heard about this woman. Like, she was just basically a fly in the ointment, throwing shit against the wall with much less basis than anybody else, but getting all sorts of, like on TikTok or whatever it was, but just sort of basically throwing wackadoo conspiracies at this thing, in getting millions of TikTok views, just polluting the understanding of any of the people who were able to pay attention for longer than 4 seconds. So yeah, I'm familiar with that.
I can't remember her name. I watched some of the videos, and then when people would challenge her on certain points that she made, she had like counterpoints and was arguing against the evidence. She was saying that the true suspect, that it was, I believe she identified a female. I can't remember her relationship to the students, but it was really, it was completely baseless. But she had a very, very large social media following, and it just caught fire. I mean, I was seeing it on mainstream media, corporate media, where they were talking about this lady and her theories about the crime. And I think at that point they had already made an arrest, or were very close. So then the police agency out there is defending themselves against this lady who just has a YouTube channel or a TikTok or whatever, trying to debunk her statements online. I mean, that's why I'm very careful whenever I speak about any case. I don't just make wild accusations about what I think happened or who I would think is responsible, because I'm not fully versed in that case. And if you say, I think it was Mr. X, and you have no basis for that, you could destroy Mr. X's life based on that you have a lot of followers on your social media account, and that person might not have anything to do with it. So I felt that was very irresponsible of her to do. And then when she was confronted about it, she just doubled down, and she just absolutely insistent that, she was correct, and then changed her argument to fit the facts that she was being confronted with. But luckily it seems that that most of that was beaten back, and that she's primarily off the scene now. But
I believe I saw a lawsuit creep into her world a month or two ago, and I want to say that a lot of that activity took place after the arrest. I want to say a lot of that activity took place post arrest of Brian, whatever his name is,
is it Kohlberger?
Yeah, and so I believe she was doing that, and maybe even hit her big stride post arrest. And I would have to look back, but it would probably be interesting to follow up on. I heard tell of lawsuits, because my understanding was that she was casting aspersions on private citizens outside of the suspect in question on a huge public platform. And these are not celebrities. So you don't get to take somebody whose name isn't in the open, put it in the open, and then pile shit all over it. That's what you're not allowed to do, unless they're a celebrity. If you're a celebrity, basically people are going to be able to just dump on you because your name's already out there. But I think she was looking at libel or slander, or a combination of libel and slander. Which it seems, to your point, that's how irresponsible her behavior was. It seems like she didn't care to protect herself in any way, shape, or form. And yeah, that's really reckless. And I hope there was a case, to be honest. I mean, somebody should put people down who are spouting harmful nonsense about other private citizens. But yeah, that's just gross. That whole case was wild. That'll probably be something to talk about in a year if either one of us has really gotten all the details, and you may very well have all along the way. Yeah, that seems like he seems like one of those really disturbing individuals that's going to be talked about for a while. So I'm curious about what the intricacies of that case will have shaken out to have been, and we can go back through some of that, because it'll probably be super creepy. But
when you have cases like that, any case, but I mean especially a case of large public interest, that offense occurred in the state of Idaho, and they did their government did a very good job in the Lori Vallow case and the Chad Daybell. That was the Doomsday Mom, where they had, as things were becoming public in court, they were releasing documents that were available then for public consumption, because once it gets past that discovery process, I went to one of their websites for, I can't remember the name of the county that it occurred, but they had, like the regular banner and the regular things for people that lived there to do. And then they had like a cases of interest section, and it had documents that were publicly available and case statuses and stuff. And they did a really good job, because I'm sure they were inundated with media requests. But they did that with that Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell case. I'd imagine that Kohlberger case is going to draw the same level of public interest.
Yeah, I bet you're right. I bet you're right. We'll circle back. Creepy guy. He gives me the creeps. Not a lot of people give me the creeps through the TV.
He's just kind of got that blank stare. And I mean, otherwise, he looks like he's a very handsome man, that he is a young guy, reasonably successful. I don't really know the full story. Why, if he knew those kids, if he did not, if he had taught them, if they were neighbors. I don't really know any of the background. The stories that I've read about it in the national media, it's just kind of like this generic recycling of a very 30,000 foot view fact pattern. But I don't really know any of the details. I like to, on cases like that, if you can watch the live stream in court and the jury isn't able to hear certain parts, and now they have a little white noise machine they put on, and so the jury can't hear, but those sidebar discussions where they're debating about a certain piece of evidence that it should be admissible or isn't admissible, unfairly prejudicial. Now with the live stream from the courtrooms, you really get to see some of the really most interesting things from these trials live. It's really pretty amazing.
Yeah, I find that fascinating as well. And there's a great nitty gritty in those sidebars. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, I think there's so much more to be sort of learned about that case, and it's got the creepy vibe that kind of makes you morbidly curious. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be more about that. We might dig into it. In the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up. I think you've given me enough to think about, and let's leave some on the table for next time. Oh, and I'm going to have to circle back. There's a lot of value in your topics, and there's as you're already, you guys are already a nonprofit, correct?
Yes, sir.
I wouldn't be the slightest bit surprised if you could get funding to put together a sort of step-by-step, like you were talking about before, in terms of the, explaining a genealogy related investigation and that type of thing. So just food for thought. We'll circle back on that, but that's something I've stepped into on topics of education or history or economic development or conservation, pretty much anything that's good for society. And this is an educational topic for sure. And you've already got an audience. So just planting seeds, but that would be interesting. I'd want to watch that. That's why I asked. I'm is that going to be a Fin Inc. project, or where am I going to see that? Because that seems like you could package it and sell it, make it a course or make it part of a course kind of thing. I don't know. Neat. And you're certainly the guy for that kind of conversation. But yeah, it's something to think about. I think people might fund you to explain some of these topics to appropriate audiences.
Well, I can very clearly hear you over my phone, but my computer just did the fatal crash. Oh,
you disappeared. Oh, that's hilarious. And I got it all on tape. Okay, well, now you're definitely getting kicked off. Well, that was fun, man. I appreciate the information, and I'm going to sleep a little bit better at night.
Well, that's good. And I think, like we talked about, I think as people, when we try to hoard the secrets and the shadows, that's when the people become concerned and conspiracies and stuff. But I mean, when you just lay it out and you say, this is what it is, this is what we do, this is how we use it, and this is how it works, I think, 20 years from now, this won't even be a discussion. It'll just be a standard investigative practice, as standard as comparing fingerprints is now. Because people they'll have been exposed to it, they'll understand it, they won't be concerned about it, that it's being misused in a way, against private citizens or innocent people. And I think it'll just take time for them to digest it and understand it, as is with anything new. But I think it will get there eventually.
I agree. That seems to track, especially as people come online in terms of their understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, my man. Anything coming up?
Nope. Just work.
No events, no speeches. All right. And people can find the Florida Investigators Network at FININC.org. Correct.
Well, Tom, it was great. Again, thank you very much.
Thanks, man. Talk to you soon.
The best way to follow, subscribe, rate, or message the show is to visit njcriminalpodcast.com.